I thought the worst part of living back home at 28 would be explaining to dates why I still had a bedroom down the hall from my parents. I was wrong. The worst part was standing in our kitchen at 11:30 on a Sunday night, staring at my mother as she casually informed me that I would be spending the next 3 months babysitting 6 neighborhood children while she and my father sailed around Europe. She slid a laminated schedule across the granite countertop like she was handing me a restaurant menu. Her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the surface with practiced confidence. The triumphant smile on her face told me everything I needed to know about how long she had been planning this moment. My name is Greg, and until that moment, I thought I had finally achieved something resembling independence. After 6 years of struggling through college and another 4 climbing the corporate ladder, I just landed a promotion to senior software developer at a tech company based out of Denver. The best part was that my position was fully remote, which meant I could work from anywhere with a decent internet connection. I had moved back to my childhood home in suburban Colorado temporarily while I saved up for a down payment on my own place. The arrangement seemed perfect until my parents decided to turn my career flexibility into their personal advantage. The 6 children my mother expected me to supervise ranged from barely out of diapers to nearly teenagers. Tommy was 4 years old, the kind of kid who treated every piece of furniture like a jungle gym and every quiet moment like a challenge to create chaos. Sarah and Sam were 7-year-old twins who had mastered the art of synchronized mischief, able to destroy a room in the time it took an adult to answer the phone. Jessica was 9, a quiet observer who seemed to absorb everything around her with the intensity of someone much older. Marcus was 10, built like a linebacker, and with the temperament to match, constantly looking for opportunities to assert dominance over anyone smaller or weaker. Amanda was 12, already showing signs of the entitled attitude that comes from being told you are mature for your age, while simultaneously being treated like a princess. As my mother explained their elaborate summer schedule complete with color-coded activities and emergency contact information for each family, I felt my carefully constructed adult life crumbling around me. Swimming lessons on Mondays, soccer practice, on Tuesdays, art camp, on Wednesdays, library visits on Thursdays, and playground time on Fridays. Each child had different dietary restrictions, medication schedules, and behavioral triggers that needed to be managed. The weekend schedule was even more demanding with birthday parties, family visits, and recreational activities that would require constant transportation and supervision. What made the situation truly unbearable was not just the scope of responsibility being dumped on me, but the casual way my parents assumed I would accept it. My father stood in the doorway, wearing his new cruise attire, already mentally checked out and focused on their upcoming adventure. My mother spoke about the arrangement as if it was a foregone conclusion, using phrases like, "We knew you would understand," and "family comes first," with the kind of confidence that suggested she had never considered the possibility that I might refuse. The breaking point came when I started asking questions about compensation. My mother looked genuinely puzzled when I mentioned payment, as if the idea of being financially compensated for 3 months of full-time childcare was completely foreign to her. She reminded me that I was living in their house, rent-free, eating their food, and using their utilities. According to her logic, watching the neighborhood children was simply my contribution to the household, a way of earning my keep while I saved money for my own place. That was when I decided to do some investigating. While my parents finished their packing upstairs, I started looking through the papers my mother had left on the kitchen counter. Mixed in with the emergency contact forms and daily schedules, I found something that changed everything. There were invoices and payment receipts that showed exactly how much money was involved in this summer arrangement. My parents were not doing a favor for struggling neighbors or helping out with a community childcare crisis. They were running a business, charging each family $1,500 for what they advertised as professional childcare services with a certified childcare provider. The advertisements they had placed in the neighborhood Facebook group painted me as an experienced childcare professional with a degree in child development and years of experience managing large groups of children. According to their marketing materials, I was passionate about creating enriching summer experiences for children and had specifically requested to spend my summer break working with local families. None of it was true, but the families had paid in advance based on these false qualifications. My parents were collecting $9,000 for the summer while expecting me to provide all the labor for free. They had essentially sold my services without my knowledge or consent, created false credentials to justify their premium pricing, and planned to pocket the entire amount while I sacrificed my career advancement and personal time. The realization that they had been planning this deception for months while allowing me to believe they respected my professional goals was devastating. As I sat in the empty kitchen surrounded by schedules and contact forms, I felt a familiar sensation from childhood when I realized my parents had made important decisions about my life without consulting me. The difference was that this time, I was not a powerless child who had to accept their choices. I was a financially independent adult with my own resources and connections. If they wanted to play games with my life, I could play games too. I picked up my phone and called Emma, my girlfriend of 8 months, who happened to be a licensed child psychologist working for the County Family Services Department. Emma had been supportive of my decision to live with my parents temporarily, understanding the financial benefits of saving money for a house while maintaining my career momentum. She had even met my parents several times and seemed to genuinely enjoy their company, which made what I was about to tell her even more shocking. When Emma answered the phone, I could hear the concern in her voice as I explained the situation. She listened quietly as I described the financial deception, the false advertising, and the complete disregard for my consent in the arrangement. As a professional who worked with families in crisis, she immediately recognized the problematic dynamics at play. She also understood the legal implications of advertising false credentials and accepting payment for services under false pretenses. Emma suggested that we document everything before my parents left for their cruise. She advised me to photograph all the paperwork, save copies of the advertisements, and create a detailed record of what I had been told versus what was actually happening. She also recommended that I allow my parents to leave as planned rather than confronting them immediately. According to Emma, if my parents had already collected payment from the families and spent the money on their cruise, confronting them before departure would only create a situation where the children would suffer while the adults fought over money. The next morning, I helped my parents load their luggage into the taxi that would take them to the airport. I hugged them goodbye and assured them that everything would be fine while they were away. My mother gave me one final set of instructions and reminded me that the first children would arrive at 8 o'clock sharp the following morning. She seemed genuinely pleased with how well her plan was working, completely unaware that I had spent the night developing a plan of my own. As their taxi pulled away from the driveway, I felt a mixture of anger and determination that I had not experienced since childhood. My parents had underestimated me, completely assuming that I would passively accept their manipulation because I always had before. They were about to discover that their son had grown up to be much more resourceful than they realized. The first morning arrived with the subtlety of a natural disaster. At exactly 8 o'clock, 6 children and their parents descended on my family home like an invasion force equipped with backpacks, lunch boxes, and enough energy to power a small city. The parents dropped off their children with the kind of relieved expressions typically seen on people being released from prison, offering hurried reminders about allergies and pickup times before practically sprinting back to their cars. Tommy immediately established himself as a force of pure destruction, treating our living room like his personal playground within the first 10 minutes of arrival. He climbed on furniture, knocked over lamps, and somehow managed to turn the coffee table into a fort using throw pillows and determination. When I attempted to redirect his energy toward more appropriate activities, he responded by screaming at a volume that suggested he was auditioning for a role as an air raid siren. Sarah and Sam worked together with the precision of a military unit, systematically exploring every corner of the house to identify vulnerabilities they could exploit later. They found my home office within the first hour and immediately began asking detailed questions about my computer equipment, my work schedule, and whether I kept important documents in my desk drawers. Their innocent curiosity felt more like reconnaissance than genuine interest. Jessica positioned herself in a corner of the living room with a book, but I noticed that her eyes were constantly moving, cataloging every interaction and conversation around her. She spoke only when directly questioned and gave answers that revealed far more awareness of adult dynamics than most 9-year-olds possessed. There was something unsettling about her watchfulness, as if she was gathering intelligence for purposes I could not yet understand. Marcus appointed himself the unofficial leader of the group and immediately began testing boundaries with the kind of systematic approach that suggested previous experience with challenging authority figures. He deliberately broke small household rules, watched for my reactions, and adjusted his behavior based on what he observed. When I asked him to stop jumping on the couch, he switched to punching throw pillows. When I redirected him away from the pillows, he started kicking the coffee table legs. Amanda carried herself with the confidence of someone who expected special treatment based on her status as the oldest child in the group. She demanded snacks that were not on the approved list, insisted on activities that were not part of the planned schedule, and spoke to me with the kind of casual disrespect that suggested she viewed me as hired help rather than an authority figure. By lunchtime on the first day, I realized that managing 6 children with vastly different personalities and energy levels was only part of the challenge. The real problem was that none of them seemed to respect my authority or take seriously any boundaries I attempted to establish. They treated my instructions like suggestions, my rules like negotiations, and my attempts at discipline like entertainment. The situation escalated dramatically on Tuesday morning when Tommy decided to conduct a scientific experiment involving the upstairs bathroom sink, 3 rolls of toilet paper, and approximately half a bottle of liquid soap. I discovered his research project when water began dripping through the kitchen ceiling directly onto the breakfast table. By the time I reached the bathroom, Tommy had created a flood that would have impressed professional water damage restoration specialists. While I was dealing with Tommy's aquatic disaster, Sarah and Sam used the distraction to explore my home office in greater detail. They managed to disconnect my computer monitors, rearrange my desk drawers, and somehow reset all my keyboard shortcuts to random combinations that made normal typing nearly impossible. When I confronted them about the unauthorized office visit, they claimed they were just trying to help me organize my workspace. The twins' sabotage of my office equipment was particularly devastating because I had important client presentations scheduled for later in the week. My remote work arrangement depended on maintaining professional standards and meeting deadlines, both of which became nearly impossible when I was spending my days cleaning up disasters and searching for missing equipment that had been mysteriously relocated throughout the house. Marcus escalated his boundary testing on Wednesday by deliberately breaking one of my mother's decorative vases during what he claimed was an accident while playing indoor soccer with a rolled-up sock. The vase had been a wedding gift that my parents displayed prominently in the living room, and its destruction felt like a deliberate challenge to my ability to maintain order in their absence. When I explained that indoor soccer was not an appropriate activity, Marcus responded by suggesting that maybe I needed to provide better entertainment options if I wanted him to avoid accidents. Jessica's role in the group dynamic became clearer as the week progressed. She rarely participated in the destructive activities directly, but she never warned me about what the other children were planning either. Instead, she watched from the sidelines with the detached interest of someone observing a social experiment. Her silence felt deliberately strategic, as if she was protecting information that might be valuable later. Amanda's challenges to my authority became more sophisticated as she realized that direct confrontation was less effective than subtle manipulation. She began questioning every decision I made, from meal choices to activity scheduling, always phrasing her objections as helpful suggestions or innocent questions. Her technique was particularly effective because it forced me to justify routine decisions while undermining my confidence in my own judgment. The parents who picked up their children each evening seemed blissfully unaware of the daily chaos their offspring had created. They asked generic questions about how the day had gone and accepted my diplomatically edited responses without much interest in details. Several parents mentioned how convenient the arrangement was for their summer plans and how grateful they were to have found such reliable childcare at reasonable rates. By Thursday, I began to suspect that the children's behavior was more coordinated than coincidental. The timing of their various disruptions seemed too well orchestrated to be random, and their ability to create maximum chaos with minimum effort suggested advanced planning. When I mentioned this observation to Emma during our nightly phone call, she encouraged me to pay closer attention to how they communicated with each other and whether there were patterns in their disruptive behavior. Emma also suggested that I begin documenting the children's activities with photographs and written records, both as protection against potential accusations of neglect and as evidence of what was actually happening during the day. She helped me set up a discrete monitoring system using my smartphone and laptop cameras that would allow me to record interactions without the children's knowledge. Friday morning brought the most revealing incident of the week. I overheard Jessica having a quiet conversation with Marcus about whether they were supposed to make me more frustrated or if they should wait until the weekend to implement the next phase of their plan. When I asked Jessica what plan she was referring to, she immediately claimed that she had been talking about their plan to build a fort in the backyard after lunch. The mention of a plan confirmed my suspicions that the children were following some kind of coordinated strategy designed to create problems for me. The question was whether this strategy had been developed independently by the children themselves, or whether they were following instructions from their parents. Given the sophisticated nature of their psychological manipulation and the timing of their various disruptions, adult involvement seemed increasingly likely. That evening, Emma arrived for dinner and casually engaged the children in conversation while I prepared their meal. As a trained child psychologist, she was skilled at asking questions that seemed innocent while gathering important information about family dynamics and behavioral motivations. Her conversation with the children revealed several concerning details about what they had been told to expect from their summer experience and how they had been instructed to handle various situations. According to Emma's observations, the children had been given very specific instructions about how to behave during their time at my house, including suggestions for testing my patience and reporting back to their parents about my reactions. The parents were apparently using their children as informants to gather information about my capabilities as a caregiver and my commitment to the arrangement my parents had created. As the first week concluded, I realized that I was not just dealing with typical childcare challenges or normal behavioral issues. I was caught in the middle of an elaborate manipulation scheme involving both my parents and the neighborhood families, with 6 children serving as unwitting participants in an adult power struggle designed to undermine my independence and force me into a subservient role within my own family. The discovery that the children were following instructions from their parents rather than acting on their own initiative changed my approach to the situation completely. Instead of viewing them as obstacles to overcome, I began to see them as victims of adult manipulation who deserved protection from the psychological games their families were playing. My plan for dealing with the situation would need to address both the immediate problem of managing the children's behavior and the larger issue of exposing the coordinated deception that was harming everyone involved. The weekend provided me with the first opportunity to implement the surveillance system Emma had helped me design. While the children were occupied with outdoor activities, I installed small cameras in strategic locations throughout the house, positioned to monitor common areas without invading anyone's privacy. The system was connected to my laptop and smartphone, allowing me to review footage remotely and document patterns of behavior that might not be immediately obvious during direct supervision. Emma also helped me research the legal requirements for recording in my own home and ensured that our documentation efforts would be admissible as evidence if the situation escalated to involve law enforcement or family services. As a county employee, she understood the importance of proper procedures and helped me maintain professional standards while gathering information about what was really happening with the children. Monday morning brought a new level of sophistication to the children's disruptive activities. Marcus had apparently spent the weekend developing more subtle approaches to property destruction, focusing on items that were valuable but not immediately noticeable when damaged. I caught him attempting to scratch the surface of my laptop screen with a paper clip, claiming that he was just trying to clean off a smudge that he had noticed. When I confronted Marcus about deliberately damaging my equipment, he became defensive and accused me of being paranoid and unfair. His reaction was so perfectly calibrated to make me appear unreasonable that I suspected he had been coached on how to respond to challenges about his behavior. The performance was too polished for a 10-year-old to have developed independently. Sarah and Sam had upgraded their office sabotage to include more technical interference with my work equipment. They had somehow learned how to access my computer settings and had spent time over the weekend researching how to create problems that would be difficult to trace but would significantly impact my productivity. On Monday morning, I discovered that they had changed all my software configurations, deleted important shortcuts, and somehow managed to corrupt several data files. The twins' technical knowledge was impressive for 7-year-olds, but it raised questions about where they had acquired such specific information about computer systems. When I asked them how they had learned to modify software settings, they claimed they had just been experimenting and had not realized they were causing problems. Their explanation was plausible enough to avoid direct consequences, but sophisticated enough to suggest adult guidance. Amanda had developed a new strategy focused on social manipulation rather than direct confrontation. She began making comments designed to undermine my confidence and authority, suggesting that I seemed stressed and overwhelmed by the responsibilities of childcare. Her observations were framed as expressions of concern, but they were clearly intended to plant seeds of doubt about my competence and stability. Jessica continued her role as the group's intelligence gatherer, but I noticed that she was paying particular attention to my phone calls and computer activities. She had developed techniques for listening to conversations from adjacent rooms and had become skilled at reading computer screens from across the room. Her surveillance skills were remarkable for someone her age and suggested training that extended beyond normal childhood curiosity. Tommy's destructive activities had evolved to include more targeted attacks on items that would be expensive or impossible to replace. On Tuesday, he managed to spill grape juice on important documents that were spread across my desk, claiming that he had been trying to bring me a snack as a surprise. The timing of his accident was suspiciously perfect, occurring just moments after I had received an important phone call from a client. The pattern of escalating sabotage confirmed that the children were working from some kind of coordinated plan, designed to create maximum disruption with minimum risk of serious consequences. Each incident was carefully calibrated to appear accidental or innocent, while causing genuine problems for my work and personal life. The sophistication of their approach suggested adult planning and supervision. Wednesday afternoon brought the most shocking revelation yet. While reviewing surveillance footage from the previous day, I witnessed Marcus systematically searching through drawers and cabinets in my bedroom, carefully photographing the contents with a smartphone that I had never seen him use before. He was not randomly exploring or playing with interesting objects. He was conducting a deliberate inventory of valuable items and personal belongings. When I confronted Marcus about the unauthorized search of my bedroom, he initially denied being in the room at all. When I showed him the video evidence, his demeanor changed completely. Instead of the defiant attitude he typically displayed when caught misbehaving, he became genuinely frightened and began crying in a way that suggested real distress rather than manipulation. Through gentle questioning, I learned that Marcus had been given specific instructions by his father to identify and photograph valuable items in the house, with promises of significant rewards for gathering useful information. His father had told him that my parents had asked for help keeping track of their possessions while they were away, and that Marcus would be helping protect the family by documenting what was in the house. Marcus's confession opened the door to understanding the larger scope of what was happening. The children were not just being instructed to create behavioral problems and test my patience. They were being used as reconnaissance agents to gather information about the financial resources and personal vulnerabilities of my family. The parents were using their children to conduct espionage operations under the guise of innocent childcare arrangements. The discovery that Marcus had been promised $200 for each successful mission he completed explained the escalation in his disruptive behavior and his willingness to risk serious consequences for relatively minor acts of sabotage. He was not acting out due to behavioral problems or lack of supervision. He was following a detailed assignment list provided by his father and motivated by financial incentives that were significant from a 10-year-old's perspective. As Marcus continued to open up about his instructions, other children began admitting their own assigned tasks. Sarah revealed that she had been told to delete any computer files that seemed related to money or business, with the explanation that she was helping protect my family's financial privacy from potential identity thieves. Sam admitted that he had been recording conversations using a small device his mother had hidden in his backpack, with instructions to capture any discussions about money travel plans or family conflicts. Amanda's role was perhaps the most disturbing. She had been instructed to engage me in inappropriate conversations and to create situations that could be misinterpreted or taken out of context if they were recorded or witnessed by other adults. Her parents had coached her on how to manipulate interactions to create compromising situations that could be used to discredit me if necessary. Even Jessica had been assigned specific responsibilities, though her tasks were more focused on psychological observation than direct action. She had been told to monitor my emotional state, document any signs of stress or instability, and report back on how I interacted with the other children when I thought no one was watching. The revelation that all 6 children were operating under detailed instructions from their parents transformed my understanding of the situation completely. This was not a simple case of my parents making poor decisions about summer childcare arrangements. This was an organized conspiracy involving multiple families working together to gather intelligence, create evidence of my inadequacy as a caregiver, and potentially set me up for serious accusations that could damage my reputation and career permanently. Emma's reaction to the children's confessions was both professional and personal. As a child psychologist, she recognized the psychological damage that was being inflicted on the children by forcing them to participate in deceptive and potentially illegal activities. As my girlfriend, she was horrified by the scope of the manipulation and the potential consequences if the parents' plan had been allowed to continue unchecked. Together, we developed a strategy for protecting both the children and ourselves while gathering evidence of the conspiracy that was unfolding. Emma contacted her supervisor at the County Family Services Department to report suspected child manipulation and to request guidance on proper procedures for documenting and addressing the situation. She also helped me contact a family attorney who specialized in cases involving fraud and elder abuse. The attorney's initial assessment was that my parents and the neighborhood families had potentially committed several serious crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, child endangerment, and extortion. The fact that they had used children to conduct surveillance and gather evidence for potential blackmail elevated the situation beyond simple financial deception into criminal territory that could result in felony charges. As Wednesday evening concluded, I realized that my summer had become about much more than simply surviving 3 months of unwanted babysitting responsibilities. I was now responsible for protecting 6 children from their own families while building a legal case against adults who had severely underestimated both my intelligence and my commitment to doing the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. Thursday morning brought an unexpected complication when Amanda's mother arrived for an unannounced visit, claiming she had forgotten to include important allergy medication in her daughter's daily supplies. Her casual explanation seemed plausible until I realized that she was systematically observing the condition of the house, the behavior of the children, and my responses to various situations that arose during her visit. Amanda's mother timed her arrival perfectly to witness Tommy in the middle of one of his most spectacular meltdowns, a screaming tantrum that I had been secretly recording as evidence of the behavioral manipulation the children had been subjected to. Instead of seeing a child who had been pushed beyond his emotional limits by adult manipulation, she saw what appeared to be completely inadequate supervision and lack of appropriate behavioral management. The surveillance footage I'd been collecting suddenly became a double-edged sword. While it provided evidence of the children's coordinated sabotage activities and their confessions about following parental instructions, it also documented moments when their behavior appeared genuinely out of control. And my responses seemed insufficient to outside observers who lacked context about what was really happening. Amanda's mother spent approximately 30 minutes observing our daily routine, asking pointed questions about scheduling meal planning, educational activities, and emergency procedures. Her questions were framed as innocent curiosity about how I was managing such a large group of children, but they felt like a formal evaluation designed to identify weaknesses in my caregiving approach. During her visit, Amanda's behavior changed dramatically from the manipulative testing I had grown accustomed to over the previous weeks. She became clingy and emotional, complaining about being hungry, despite having eaten breakfast less than 2 hours earlier. She also mentioned being tired and having trouble sleeping at night, creating the impression that her basic needs were not being adequately met. The performance was convincing enough that I began to question whether Amanda's manipulative behavior had been genuine, or whether she was actually struggling with the pressure of following her parents' instructions while maintaining normal childhood activities. The psychological toll of participating in the adult conspiracy was clearly affecting all the children in different ways. After Amanda's mother left, I contacted Emma immediately to discuss the implications of the unexpected evaluation visit. Emma pointed out that the timing was not coincidental and that the other families were likely coordinating their information gathering to build a comprehensive case against my competence as a caregiver. The goal was probably to create documented evidence that could be used to demand refunds from my parents or to justify breaking their contracts without financial penalty. Emma also warned me that the families might be building toward more serious accusations that could involve law enforcement or family services investigations. If they could document evidence of neglect or inappropriate behavior, they could potentially file criminal charges that would destroy my reputation and career, even if they were ultimately proven false. Friday afternoon brought the crisis I had been dreading. Marcus's father arrived to pick up his son in an obviously intoxicated state, reeking of alcohol, and speaking with the slurred speech patterns that indicated serious impairment. When Marcus saw his father's condition, he became visibly frightened and asked if he could stay at my house until his father felt better. Marcus's father responded to his son's request with anger that quickly escalated to verbal abuse directed at both Marcus and me. He accused me of turning his son against him and claimed that Marcus had been lying about the instructions he had been given regarding surveillance and sabotage activities. According to his father, Marcus was making up stories to get attention and to avoid taking responsibility for his own behavioral problems. The confrontation became physical when Marcus's father grabbed his son's arm roughly and began dragging him toward the car, despite Marcus's obvious distress and my attempts to intervene diplomatically. When I suggested that perhaps someone else could provide transportation since he had been drinking, Marcus's father turned his aggression toward me with threats that felt genuinely dangerous. I immediately called the police while trying to position myself between Marcus and his father, who had become increasingly agitated as he realized that his behavior was being witnessed and potentially recorded. The other children were terrified by the scene unfolding in our driveway, with several of them crying and asking if Marcus was going to be hurt by his father. The police arrived within minutes and immediately assessed the situation as a potential case of child endangerment and domestic violence. Marcus's father was given a field sobriety test that he failed dramatically, resulting in his arrest for public intoxication and attempted child endangerment. Marcus was placed in temporary protective custody, while social services determined the safest placement for him until his father could demonstrate sobriety and appropriate parenting capabilities. The incident created a formal record that documented many of the concerns Emma and I had been discussing privately. The police report included Marcus's statements about being instructed to conduct surveillance activities and his fear of disappointing his father by failing to complete assigned missions. The officer who responded to the call was experienced in cases involving family manipulation and recognized the signs of children being used as tools in adult conflicts. Emma arrived at the house within an hour of the police call, both in her professional capacity as a county family services employee and as my partner who was concerned about my safety and well-being. She immediately began working with the responding officers and social services personnel to ensure that Marcus was placed in a safe environment while investigations proceeded. The other families were contacted by police as part of the investigation into Marcus's situation, and their responses revealed the coordinated nature of their summer arrangement. Several parents demanded immediate return of their children and refunds of their payments, claiming that they had been deceived about the quality of supervision their children were receiving. However, the children's own statements to investigators painted a very different picture of their summer experience. Without the pressure of parental expectations and instructions, they began describing their actual feelings about the activities we had shared and their genuine appreciation for the stability and safety they had found at my house, compared to the chaos and pressure they experienced at home. Jessica in particular surprised everyone by speaking eloquently about how much she had enjoyed having a safe space to read quietly without being criticized for being antisocial or pressured to participate in activities that made her uncomfortable. She also revealed that her mother had been telling her that she was a burden on the family and that the summer arrangement was necessary because no one wanted to spend time with her during vacation. The twins admitted that they had been terrified of disappointing their parents by failing to complete their assigned sabotage missions, but they also described feeling guilty about damaging my property and disrupting my work. They had wanted to stop following their instructions after the first few days, but had been afraid of the consequences of disobedience. Tommy's emotional testimony was perhaps the most powerful evidence of what had really been happening during our summer together. Despite being only 4 years old, he was able to articulate that he felt safe and cared for at my house in ways that he did not feel at home. He also revealed that his parents had been telling him that his behavior problems were the reason they needed to send him away for the summer. Amanda's revelations about her parents' instructions regarding inappropriate interactions were particularly disturbing to the investigating officers. She described being coached on how to create situations that could be misinterpreted and how to manipulate conversations to gather compromising information. The psychological manipulation she had been subjected to constituted a form of abuse that required immediate intervention. As Friday evening concluded with police reports filed, children placed in protective care, and a full investigation launched into the conspiracy involving my parents and the neighborhood families, I realized that the situation had evolved far beyond anything I could have anticipated when I first discovered the financial deception behind the summer arrangement. The children who had been weapons in their parents' war against my independence had become allies in exposing the truth about what had really been happening. Their courage in speaking honestly to investigators, despite their fear of parental retaliation, demonstrated the resilience and integrity that their families had been trying to exploit and destroy. Emma and I spent Friday night reviewing the evidence we had gathered and preparing for what was likely to be a complex legal process involving multiple families' potential criminal charges and custody investigations. The weekend would bring my parents home from their cruise to face consequences they had never imagined when they hatched their summer scheme. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of ominous quiet that precedes major storms. The house felt unnaturally peaceful, without the constant energy and chaos of 6 children. But the silence was filled with anxiety about what would happen when my parents returned and discovered that their carefully orchestrated summer plan had exploded into a criminal investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies. Emma stayed overnight Friday to help me prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable once my parents learned about the events of the previous day. She had spent the evening coordinating with her supervisor at Family Services and the police detective assigned to the case to ensure that proper procedures were followed when my parents were questioned about their role in the conspiracy. The detective had advised us that my parents would likely be arrested upon their return if they attempted to continue the summer arrangement or if they made any threats related to the investigation. The evidence gathered from the children's testimony and the documentation Emma and I had collected was sufficient to support charges of fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected early return when my parents arrived home 3 days ahead of schedule, looking exhausted and angry rather than refreshed and relaxed from their European vacation. Their luggage suggested a hurried departure, and their demeanor indicated that their cruise had not concluded as planned. My father immediately demanded to know where the children were and why the house was so quiet on a Sunday afternoon when he expected to find evidence of the bustling summer program they had arranged. His expectation that everything would be proceeding according to their original plan. Despite their early return demonstrated how completely they had underestimated the complexity of the situation they had created. My mother's reaction to my explanation of recent events progressed through disbelief, denial, and anger before settling into a defensive posture that blamed everyone except herself for the problems that had developed. According to her interpretation, the neighborhood families were ungrateful for the quality childcare services they had received. The children were lying to get attention, and I was being manipulated by Emma into overreacting to normal childhood behavior issues. The conversation became heated when my father revealed the reason for their early return from the cruise. They had been caught cheating at casino games aboard the ship and had been asked to disembark at the nearest port with their gambling privileges permanently revoked. The money they had collected from the neighborhood families for summer childcare had been lost to poor gambling decisions and casino security investigations. The revelation that my parents had gambled away the family's payments while leaving me to deal with the consequences of their fraud was the final confirmation I needed that their summer plan had been designed from the beginning to benefit only themselves. They had never intended to use the child care payments for legitimate business expenses or to compensate me for my labor. My mother's response to learning about the police investigation was to suggest that we could still salvage the situation by claiming that the children had been making up stories and that the whole incident with Marcus's father had been a misunderstanding. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was unwilling to lie to law enforcement officers to protect the family from the consequences of their own actions. The confrontation escalated when my father threatened to evict me from the house immediately unless I cooperated with their efforts to minimize the legal consequences of the investigation. He seemed to believe that my financial dependence on their housing arrangement would force me to choose family loyalty over honesty with law enforcement. Emma's arrival during the height of the argument changed the dynamic completely. Her presence as both a county employee and a witness to the conversation meant that any threats or attempts at intimidation would be documented and could be used as evidence in the ongoing investigation. Her professional training also allowed her to recognize signs of the psychological manipulation that my parents had apparently been using against me for years. The moment that defined the entire confrontation came when Detective Rodriguez arrived with the family services caseworker who had been assigned to the case. My parents' reaction to seeing official investigators at their door was immediate panic, followed by desperate attempts to control the narrative about what had really happened during their absence. My mother tried to convince the detective that the children had been happy and well cared for under my supervision, but that they were now being influenced by Emma to make false accusations against their families. She suggested that Emma had ulterior motives for encouraging the investigation and was using her professional position to create problems where none had existed before. Detective Rodriguez had extensive experience dealing with family manipulation cases and was not impressed by my parents' attempts to deflect responsibility or blame others for the situation they had created. He presented them with evidence that included financial records, surveillance footage, and detailed statements from all 6 children describing their assigned missions and the psychological pressure they had experienced. The detective also revealed that the investigation had expanded beyond the immediate case involving my family to include a broader examination of potential fraud and child abuse, involving all the neighborhood families who had participated in the summer arrangement. Several families were facing charges related to their use of children as informants and their coordination of activities designed to gather evidence for potential blackmail or extortion. My father's response to learning about the scope of the investigation was to attempt to negotiate a deal that would minimize their legal exposure in exchange for cooperation with the ongoing inquiry. He offered to provide information about the other families' involvement in the conspiracy if charges against him and my mother could be reduced or eliminated entirely. Detective Rodriguez explained that any cooperation agreement would need to be negotiated through the district attorney's office and would depend on the extent of their involvement in the conspiracy and their willingness to make full restitution to all affected parties. The families they had defrauded were entitled to recover their payments plus damages for the psychological harm inflicted on their children. The caseworker who accompanied Detective Rodriguez was particularly interested in the psychological dynamics that had led my parents to involve children in their fraud scheme. She explained that using children as tools in adult conflicts constituted a form of emotional abuse that could have long-term consequences for their psychological development and ability to trust adult authority figures. As Sunday evening concluded with my parents facing the reality of potential criminal charges and civil liability that could destroy their financial security and reputation in the community, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that the truth was finally being acknowledged by people with the authority to address it appropriately. The children who had been used as weapons in their parents' war against my independence were now under the protection of professionals who understood the psychological damage that had been inflicted on them. Emma and I had successfully documented and exposed a conspiracy that could have continued indefinitely if we had not been willing to stand up against family pressure and community expectations. My parents' assumption that I would prioritize family loyalty over moral integrity had been proven spectacularly wrong. Their underestimation of my resources, intelligence, and commitment to protecting vulnerable children had led them into a legal nightmare that would have consequences extending far beyond the end of summer vacation. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no possibility of returning to the manipulative family dynamics that had characterized my relationship with my parents throughout my childhood and early adulthood. The summer they had intended to use for establishing control over my independence had instead become the catalyst for my complete liberation from their psychological manipulation. Monday morning brought the beginning of formal legal proceedings that would determine the consequences for all the adults involved in the summer conspiracy. The district attorney's office had reviewed the evidence collected by Detective Rodriguez and Emma's family services team and had decided to pursue criminal charges against my parents and several neighborhood families for fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The family court hearing scheduled for Tuesday would determine temporary custody arrangements for the children while their parents faced criminal charges and underwent psychological evaluations to assess their fitness for unsupervised parenting. Judge Patricia Morrison, who presided over family court cases involving child welfare, had a reputation for taking child manipulation cases seriously and imposing severe consequences on adults who used children as tools in their personal conflicts. Emma had been assigned as the primary caseworker for all 6 children, which meant she would be responsible for coordinating their psychological evaluations, monitoring their placement in foster care or with relatives, and developing long-term treatment plans to address the trauma they had experienced during the summer. Her professional relationship with the case created some complexity for our personal relationship, but her supervisor had determined that her existing knowledge of the situation made her the most qualified person to manage the children's needs. Tuesday's court hearing provided the first opportunity for all 6 children to speak directly to Judge Morrison about their experiences during the summer and their feelings about their family situations. The judge had arranged for child advocates to be present to support the children during their testimony and to ensure that their voices were heard clearly in the legal process. Jessica was the first child to testify, and her articulate description of the psychological pressure she had experienced at home shocked everyone in the courtroom. She explained that her mother had been telling her for months that she was a social burden because of her preference for reading quietly rather than participating in group activities. The summer arrangement had been presented to Jessica as an opportunity for her to learn how to be more social and outgoing, but she had been given specific instructions to monitor my behavior and report any signs that I was becoming frustrated with her presence. Jessica's testimony revealed that she had been living with constant anxiety about disappointing her mother while simultaneously feeling guilty about the surveillance activities she had been assigned. Her description of finding genuine acceptance and safety at my house brought several people in the courtroom to tears, including Judge Morrison, who had presided over hundreds of child welfare cases during her career. Marcus's testimony was particularly powerful because he was able to describe in detail the specific instructions his father had given him regarding property damage and theft. He explained that his father had promised him significant financial rewards for creating problems that would make me appear incompetent as a caregiver, with bonuses for gathering photographic evidence of valuable items in the house. Marcus also revealed that his father had been drinking heavily throughout the summer and had become increasingly angry when Marcus expressed reluctance to continue following his assigned missions. The pressure to earn his father's approval through successful completion of sabotage activities had been creating behavioral problems at home that extended far beyond the summer arrangement. Sarah and Sam testified together holding hands for emotional support as they described the fear they had felt about disappointing their parents by failing to complete their assigned computer sabotage tasks. They explained that they had been told that my work was not important and that creating problems with my equipment would teach me valuable lessons about responsibility and time management. The twins also revealed that they had been experiencing nightmares and anxiety attacks related to the guilt they felt about damaging my property and disrupting my career activities. Their testimony included heartbreaking descriptions of how much they had enjoyed the educational activities and outdoor playtime we had shared when they were not following their parents' destructive instructions. Amanda's testimony was perhaps the most disturbing because it revealed the sophisticated psychological manipulation she had been subjected to regarding interactions with adult men. Her parents had coached her on how to create situations that could be misinterpreted as inappropriate behavior on my part, with detailed instructions about conversation topics and physical positioning that could be used to support false accusations if necessary. Amanda described feeling confused and uncomfortable about the role she had been assigned, particularly because she had genuinely enjoyed many of our conversations about books, movies, and her interests in art and music. The contrast between the natural mentorship relationship that had developed and the manipulative agenda her parents had imposed had created significant psychological conflict for her. Tommy's testimony was limited due to his age, but his simple statements about feeling safe and loved at my house were powerful evidence of the positive relationships that had developed despite the adult conspiracy designed to undermine them. His description of being afraid to go home because his parents were angry about his behavior problems provided clear evidence of the emotional abuse he had been experiencing. Judge Morrison's reaction to the children's testimony was swift and decisive. She immediately ordered that all 6 children be placed in protective custody until their parents could demonstrate fitness for unsupervised parenting through successful completion of counseling programs and parenting classes. She also ordered psychological evaluations for all the parents to assess the extent of the mental health issues that had contributed to their willingness to manipulate their own children. The criminal charges against my parents and the neighborhood families were formally filed Tuesday afternoon, with bail amounts set high enough to ensure they would remain in the community to face trial, but substantial enough to reflect the seriousness of the charges. The district attorney's office indicated that plea negotiations would be possible only if all defendants were willing to make full restitution to affected parties and accept responsibility for the psychological harm inflicted on the children. My parents' reaction to the formal charges was a mixture of shock, denial, and attempts to blame everyone except themselves for the legal consequences they were facing. My mother continued to insist that the children had been happy and well cared for during the summer, and that the investigation was based on misunderstandings and exaggerations encouraged by Emma's professional bias against their family. My father focused his anger on me, personally claiming that my disloyalty and ingratitude had destroyed the family and betrayed the sacrifices they had made to provide me with opportunities for education and career advancement. His inability to acknowledge the fraud and manipulation that had precipitated the legal crisis demonstrated the depth of his psychological investment in viewing himself as the victim rather than the perpetrator. The neighborhood families' responses varied from complete denial to desperate attempts at damage control through private settlement offers. Several families approached Emma and me through their attorneys to propose financial arrangements that would compensate us for our time and expenses in exchange for our cooperation in minimizing the criminal charges against the parents. Detective Rodriguez advised us that accepting private settlements could potentially interfere with the criminal prosecution and might send the message that child manipulation and fraud were acceptable if the perpetrators were willing to pay financial penalties. The district attorney's office was committed to pursuing criminal charges regardless of any civil settlements that might be negotiated separately. Wednesday brought news that Marcus's father had been charged with additional offenses related to his alcohol abuse and the threats he had made against me during the confrontation that led to his arrest. His pattern of using his son as a tool for harassment and surveillance while under the influence of alcohol represented a particularly serious form of child endangerment that carried enhanced penalties. The investigation had also revealed that several of the families had been sharing information and coordinating their children's activities through group text messages and private social media groups. The documentation of their conspiracy provided clear evidence that the summer arrangement had been designed from the beginning as a coordinated effort to manipulate and control my behavior rather than a legitimate childcare program. As the week concluded with all the adults facing serious legal consequences and all 6 children under the protection of family services, I felt a profound sense of relief that the truth had been fully revealed and appropriately addressed. The children who had been forced to participate in their parents' manipulation schemes were finally safe from the psychological abuse that had been disguised as normal family expectations. The courage they had shown in speaking honestly about their experiences, despite their fear of disappointing their parents, had been the key factor in exposing the full scope of the conspiracy and ensuring that justice would be served for everyone involved. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home preparing breakfast for what had become the most unexpectedly fulfilling family arrangement of my life. The legal proceedings had concluded with plea agreements that required all the adults involved to complete extensive counseling programs, perform community service related to child welfare, and make full financial restitution for their fraud and the psychological treatment needed by their children. Jessica and Tommy had been placed in my permanent custody after their parents voluntarily surrendered their parental rights rather than face the extensive rehabilitation requirements that would have been necessary to regain custody. Both children had thrived in the stable, supportive environment that Emma and I had created, with Jessica's confidence blooming as she discovered that her love of reading and quiet reflection were valued rather than criticized. Tommy had transformed from the destructive, attention-seeking child of the summer into a curious, affectionate little boy whose energy was channeled into positive activities like building elaborate block structures and helping with simple cooking tasks. His behavior problems had disappeared entirely once he was removed from the chaotic, manipulative environment that had been creating stress and confusion in his daily life. Marcus had been placed with his paternal grandmother after his father completed an intensive alcohol rehabilitation program and anger management counseling. The relationship between Marcus and me had evolved into a genuine mentorship with weekly visits that allowed him to maintain the positive connections he had formed while working through the trauma of his father's manipulation and abuse. Marcus's transformation had been the most dramatic of all the children. The aggressive, destructive behavior that had characterized his summer activities had been replaced by thoughtful, responsible conduct that reflected his natural leadership abilities. His grandmother reported that he had become protective of younger children and had developed strong moral convictions about honesty and fairness that guided his interactions with peers and adults. Sarah and Sam had been reunited with their maternal aunt after their parents completed family therapy and parenting classes designed to address the psychological dysfunction that had led them to use their children as tools in adult conflicts. The twins visited our house regularly for play dates and holiday celebrations, maintaining the positive relationships that had developed despite the difficult circumstances of our initial meeting. The twins had recovered quickly from their summer trauma, demonstrating the resilience that had allowed them to maintain their essential personalities even while following destructive instructions from their parents. Their natural creativity and intelligence had been redirected toward positive projects like science experiments and art activities that challenged them intellectually without requiring deception or manipulation. Amanda's situation had been the most complex to resolve because the psychological manipulation she had experienced was the most sophisticated and potentially damaging. She had been placed with her father's sister in another state, while her parents underwent intensive therapy to address the disturbing attitudes about gender roles and power dynamics that had led them to coach their daughter in manipulative and potentially dangerous behaviors. Amanda's recovery had been slower than the other children's, requiring specialized counseling to help her develop healthy relationship skills and appropriate boundaries with adult authority figures. Our communication was limited to occasional cards and letters, but her aunt reported that she was making steady progress in rebuilding her self-esteem and learning to trust her own judgment, rather than automatically manipulating others to get her needs met. Emma and I had gotten engaged in the fall, with our wedding planned for the following spring, when Jessica and Tommy would be able to participate as flower girl and ring bearer. Our relationship had been strengthened rather than strained by the crisis we had navigated together, demonstrating our compatibility in terms of values, problem-solving approaches, and commitment to protecting vulnerable people. Emma's professional reputation had been enhanced by her skillful management of the complex case and her ability to balance personal involvement with professional objectivity. She had been promoted to supervise other caseworkers dealing with family manipulation cases and had become a sought-after trainer for law enforcement officers and social workers, learning to recognize signs of psychological abuse involving children. My career had flourished unexpectedly as a result of the integrity I had demonstrated during the summer crisis. My employer had been impressed by my ability to maintain professional standards and meet client commitments, despite the personal chaos I was experiencing and several colleagues had recommended me for leadership positions that recognized my character as well as my technical skills. The neighborhood families had gradually rebuilt their reputations through consistent demonstration of improved parenting practices and genuine remorse for their involvement in the conspiracy. Several families had become advocates for child welfare initiatives in the community, using their experiences as examples of how easily parents can lose perspective when focused on adult conflicts rather than children's needs. My parents had been the most resistant to acknowledging the harm they had caused and accepting responsibility for their role in creating the crisis. Their community service assignments had focused on education about elder abuse and family manipulation, forcing them to confront the reality that their behavior toward me and the neighborhood children met the legal definition of abuse regardless of their intentions. The financial restitution my parents had been required to pay had depleted their retirement savings and forced them to sell their house to meet their legal obligations. They had moved to a smaller apartment and were working part-time jobs to supplement their reduced Social Security income. The consequences they were facing were severe but proportional to the harm they had caused and the criminal behavior they had chosen. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but had evolved towards something resembling mutual respect, rather than the manipulative power dynamic that had characterized our interactions throughout my childhood and early adulthood. They had been required to participate in family therapy sessions that helped them understand how their controlling behavior had damaged our relationship and prevented my healthy development into independent adulthood. The therapy sessions had been difficult, but ultimately productive, providing a structured environment for addressing decades of accumulated resentment and miscommunication. My parents had gradually come to understand that their attempts to control my life choices had been driven by their own fears and insecurities rather than genuine concern for my welfare. Christmas morning found our expanded family gathered around the tree in our living room, with Jessica reading stories to Tommy, while Marcus helped Emma prepare the holiday breakfast we would share before visiting his grandmother and the twins at their aunt's house. The scene was peaceful in ways that none of us could have imagined during the chaotic summer that had brought us together. The children had learned valuable lessons about courage, honesty, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it means disappointing adults who have authority over their lives. They had discovered that genuine safety and love do not require them to compromise their integrity or participate in harmful activities to earn acceptance and approval. Emma and I had learned that building a family based on choice and commitment rather than biological obligation can create bonds that are stronger and more meaningful than traditional relationships that assume love without requiring demonstration of care and respect. We had created a home environment where every person's individual needs and talents were valued and supported. As I watched Jessica help Tommy build a fortress with his new blocks while Marcus taught them engineering principles about structural stability, I reflected on how the worst summer of my life had become the foundation for the best life I could have imagined. The parents who had tried to use manipulation and control to keep me dependent had instead forced me to develop the independence and integrity that allowed me to create the family I'd always wanted. The lesson that emerged from our experience was both simple and profound. Protecting people you love sometimes requires standing against those who claim to love you. And real family is built through daily choices to support and respect each other, rather than through biological connections or legal obligations. True strength comes not from the ability to control others, but from the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and security to defend what is right. The children who had been used as weapons in their parents' war against my independence had taught me that courage can emerge from the most vulnerable places, and that justice often requires ordinary people to take extraordinary risks to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? The decision to stand up to people we love is never easy, But sometimes it is the only way to break cycles of manipulation and create healthier relationships for everyone involved. I would love to hear your thoughts about how you have handled family conflicts that challenged your values and principles. Thank you for taking this journey with me through one of the most challenging and ultimately rewarding periods of my life. If this story resonated with you or helped you think about your own family relationships in new ways, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from hearing about the power of choosing integrity over convenience. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about ordinary people finding the courage to do extraordinary things when it matters most. Remember that your voice and your choices matter more than you might realize. And sometimes the most important stand you will ever take is the one that protects someone who cannot protect themselves.